Good morning and welcome to Rising. Briahna and I are back on this lovely snowy Tuesday morning. We braved just minor inclement weather, nothing at all compared to what the caucus goers in Iowa dealt with yesterday. And of course, we want to get to the very exciting results. Are we ready, Briahna?
We are ready as we'll ever be. So let's get into it. Vivek Ramaswamy, that's the big news, is out of the GOP presidential primary after a less than stellar performance at last night's caucuses. President Trump mopped the floor in his superstar showing, earning roughly 51% of Republican voter support and blowing past his nearest competition by over 20 points. Let's watch some of Trump's victory speech.
So, Russia would have never attacked. Israel would have never been attacked. The Ukraine situation is so horrible. The Israeli situation is so horrible. What's happened? And we're going to get them solved. We're going to get them solved very fast. I actually said Ukraine. I know President Putin very well. I know Zelensky very well. I'm going to get them in. We're going to get it solved very quickly. Should have never happened. Would have never happened. Now you have all that death, far greater than people understand. The numbers are far, far greater than anybody would even think possible. You're going to find that out in the years to come. When they knock down these massive buildings in Ukraine and then you see they announced 2 people were slightly wounded. No, many people were killed. Many people were killed. We're going to get it stopped. But it's so sad because it should have never started. People killed and a culture destroyed. You can never replace 1,000-year-old buildings with the most beautiful golden domes and churches and everything, just all rubble now. And it's so sad, would have never, ever happened.
Now, Ramaswamy made this sober announcement at the end of his campaign, from the Iowa stage last night. We'll get more into that later. But first, let's see how the other candidates performed. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis came in second place behind Trump with 21% of the vote, and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley came in third with 19%. Trump, DeSantis, and Haley will face off next in Nevada on February 8th. Recent polling finds all 3 Republicans beating President Joe Biden in a general election matchup.
Meanwhile, it wouldn't be an Iowa caucus night without a little vote counting drama, would it? The DeSantis campaign railed against corporate media, accusing networks of calling the vote too early for Trump. Let's watch some of that.
Well, what happened tonight is appalling. The media calling the race for Donald Trump before votes have been cast. I personally spoke in multiple precincts in front of hundreds of voters. And while I'm presenting and delivering the closing argument for Ron DeSantis and actually flipping voters, people start getting alerts on their phones saying the race is over before they've even won. One guy said, why do we even bother voting if it's already over? That is absurd. That challenges the very tenets of our Republican democracy, and that should not happen.
Yeah, so a lot of frustration about this, specifically from the DeSantis campaign, the results being called immediately, instantaneously, well before the voting was finished. So to explain that argument, so I do get where they're coming from specifically with Iowa because the margin matters, frankly, for determining the delegates. So even if it's a foregone conclusion that Trump's won, depressing turnout matters for how many delegates the other candidates can accrue. That said, and also the networks had on paper have a policy of waiting until at least the polls close to cause it, and they all violated that. So one can make a lot of arguments that was badly handled. At the same time, at the end of the day, I have a hard time getting past that. I mean, if they know, they should. Why it's not their responsibility to hold off. If they know what the result is, they have to wait to tell you for the good of democracy.
Well, yes, especially in a world where people are getting alerts on their phone. It's not like Walter Cronkite somewhere on somebody's enormous, 2 foot deep TV screen in their living room, and that news is not going to get back to someone standing in line at a voting precinct. No, this is a situation where someone could very well be en route or standing in line and get an alert on their phone and say, oh, well, it's a very snowy day. If the weather is horrible, there's actual safety concerns of me being out here. Let me just cut my losses and go home. And what's the upside for the news channels? Being able to say, I'm CNN and I beat Fox News, or I'm Fox News and I beat MSNBC. I don't know that I would be so quick to sideline those concerns over the the broader democracy concerns. At the same time, though, I think realistically, people like who are in Ron DeSantis' position have to do the work of voter education to make sure that if they want the result of people staying in line because it benefits him, even if he doesn't actually win the contest, he lets voters know that on his own dime, on his own terms.
Absolutely. So massive victory for Trump, 50% of the vote, biggest win margin in years and years in several caucus cycles. Ted Cruz didn't win by this much last time. It was Santorum and Huckabee in the cycles before that. Obviously, none of those people actually went on to be the Republican nominee. Trump is in a different position where he's very likely to be the nominee. DeSantis coming in second very narrowly. I think a lot of
not very
narrowly compared to Nikki Haley, which
right.
is where the real contest was. Yeah. I think Nikki Haley was the beneficiary of so much positive media attention, media cycles in the last couple weeks, talking about how her campaign was accruing momentum. Now, obviously, she has a very favorable state coming up next, New Hampshire, where DeSantis is the one expected to do least well of the three. So we'll see. But right now, it's still on paper. Coming out of Iowa, the race is still where it was all along. Trump well ahead with DeSantis right behind him at some point.
With the exception of Vivek Ramaswamy, I think dramatically underperforming a lot of people's expectations. I know that Elon Musk, very famously, shortly before the caucuses, tweeted out that he thought that he was going to overperform the polls significantly. Many folks were citing the fact that he had done events and basically almost every district in Iowa, covering a lot more ground, doing a lot more retail politicking than anybody else in the race. It, in some ways, was being framed as a referendum on whether retail politics, actually meeting people and getting in the room, mattered. And if that's the case, then there's a strong argument here, given that Vivek Ramaswamy only came out with 7.7%, well behind both Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, that maybe that doesn't matter as much as it used to, or this argument that we've been having on the show, this debate about whether or not he just was traveling too firmly within Donald Trump's own lane. And there was just no space for a voter that likes Vivek Ramaswamy to choose him over Donald Trump, especially given that he and Donald Trump had those little dust-ups in the days right before the vote.
Sure. So, I mean, if you're looking for Trump is not inevitable narrative, I think it's very hard to really grasp one. I get, but it still technically remains the case that he had about 50% of the support, and perhaps, maybe, if it was just a contest between Donald Trump and someone else, and that other person got all of the non-Trump vote, the Nikki vote, the DeSantis vote, the Vivek vote, was all the Asa Hutchinson vote. He had a couple, I think, a small number of voters in some of those caucus sites. All of that together. Again, that's a big if, would technically rival the support that Donald Trump has. Of course, the problem is, do all the DeSantis people have Nikki as their second choice? Do all the Nikki people have DeSantis as their second choice? Are the Vivek people, would they just be Trump if not for Vivek? So it's much more complicated than that. And in fact, I think the lesson is nothing is really dissuading Republican primary voters, caucus goers from Trump. They still love Trump. They have had a number of potential off-ramps from Trump and Trumpism. They have declined to take them every time. The party, the voters, broadly speaking, not every last one of them, but enough of them stick to Trump no matter what. And that hasn't changed and doesn't look like it's about to.
Well, look, we have so much to say about the Vivek Ramaswamy outcome, which really I think is the biggest story of last night, that we're going to dedicate a whole other block to it. So do stick around. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.